Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'm flying solo this week, so I'll be delivering both the Washington Report and the call to action. Let's get right to it. The House is in recess this week, and Republicans are meeting in retreat in Florida. The Senate comes back today and will remain in session until Friday, or perhaps longer if Senate Democrats insist on continuing to delay cabinet confirmations as much as they can. Let's talk about the last 2 weeks in the House, because it's been 2 weeks since we met and there's been lots of action. 2 weeks ago, on Monday, January 13, the House came back and passed 2 bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, January 14, the House took up and passed H.R. 28, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, a bill that would prohibit transgendered men from competing in women's sports. On Wednesday, January 15, the House took up and passed 2 more bills under suspension of the rules. Then the House took up and passed H.R. 33, the United States-Taiwan Expedited Double Tax Relief Act. On Thursday, January 16, the House took up and passed H.R. 30, the Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act. Then the House went home for the weekend. The House returned to work on Tuesday, January 21. The House took up and passed 2 bills under suspension of the rules. On Wednesday, January 22, the House took up and passed S5, the Lake and Riley Act. On Thursday, January 23, the House took up and passed a bill under suspension of the rules. Then the House took up and passed H.R. 471, the Fix Our Forests Act. Then the House took up and passed H.R. 21, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act. And then they were done. This week in the House is not in session. Instead, House Republicans are meeting in a retreat in Miami to discuss their reconciliation strategy. This afternoon, they will meet with President Trump, who will stay with them for dinner. Now let's talk about the last 2 weeks in the Senate. The Senate came back to work on Monday, January 13, and voted by 82 to 10 to agree to the motion to proceed to S5, the Lake and Riley Act. On Wednesday, January 15, the Senate voted to agree to the Cornyn Amendment, which would expand the list of criminal offenses that subject a deportable alien to assault against a law enforcement officer. Then the Senate voted to reject the Coons Amendment to strike the section authorizing state attorneys general to sue the federal government. On Friday, by a vote of 61 to 35, just one more vote than necessary, the Senate voted to end debate on S5, the amended Lake and Riley Act. And then they were done for the week. The Senate came back into session on Monday, January 20. They took up S5, the Lake and Riley Act, and the Senate voted to agree to the Ernst Amendment that would expand the list of criminal offenses that subject inadmissible aliens to mandatory detention by adding offenses that resulted in death or serious bodily injury. Then the Senate voted to pass the bill as amended by a vote of 64 to 35. Then the Senate voted by 99 to 0 to confirm Marco Rubio to serve as Secretary of State. On Wednesday, January 22, the Senate voted by 52 to 47 to reject a motion to end debate on S6, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act, by refusing to provide the 8 votes necessary to end debate on the bill. Senate Democrats succeeded in killing the bill. On Thursday, January 23, the Senate voted by 72 to 26 to agree to end debate on the nomination of John Ratcliffe to serve as Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Then the Senate voted by 74 to 25 to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted by 51 to 49 to agree to end debate on the nomination of Pete Hegseth to serve as Secretary of Defense. 2 Republicans voted against ending debate, Maine's Susan Collins and Alaska's Lisa Murkowski. On Friday night, the Senate voted 50 to 50 to confirm Pete Hegseth to serve as Secretary of Defense, with Republicans Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Mitch McConnell of Kentucky voting with Democrats against Hegseth. Vice President J.D. Vance became the second vice president in history to vote to break a 50-50 tie to confirm a cabinet nominee. The first vice president to do so was Mike Pence, who voted 8 years ago to break a tie to confirm Betsy DeVos to serve as Secretary of Education in the first Trump administration. Then the Senate voted by 61 to 39 to agree to end debate on the nomination of Kristi Noem to serve as Secretary of Homeland Security, setting up a confirmation vote on Sunday morning. But the Senate Democrats came to a time agreement on the Noem nomination, so the Senate voted Saturday morning by 59 to 34 to confirm her to serve as Secretary of Homeland Security. Then the Senate voted by 67 to 23 to end debate on the nomination of Scott Bessent to serve as Secretary of the Treasury, setting up a Monday afternoon vote to confirm him to that position. So, this week in the Senate will come back today with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the nomination of Scott Bessent, President Trump's nominee to serve as Secretary of the Treasury. Following that vote, the Senate will vote to end debate on the nomination of Sean Duffy, Trump's nominee to serve as Secretary of Transportation. On Tuesday, if the Senate agrees to end debate on Duffy, the Senate will proceed at noon to a confirmation vote on the Duffy nomination. Then, at 2:15 p.m., the Senate will vote on the motion to end debate on the motion to proceed to H.R. 23. That's the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act, a vote on a bill to sanction the International Criminal Court for its actions against the Israeli government. Now let's talk about Joe Biden's parting shots. After 4 years of arguably the most lawless presidency ever, and I say, to quote the former president, that's not a joke, Joe Biden left the Oval Office on the morning of January 20 in a state of what can only be called total disrepair. During his final days in office, he took several actions that left observers stunned and many of his fellow Democrats embarrassed. On Sunday, January 12, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan directed the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to convene an outside panel of experts to, wait for it, assess the intelligence again to see if the government had come to the correct conclusion regarding the origins of the coronavirus. On Thursday, January 16, in response to pressure from left-wing activists and even some Democrats in the Congress, the White House released a statement in Biden's name saying he believed the Equal Rights Amendment had been ratified and should be considered the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. I want to take a moment to give you the information you need to understand why Biden's belief is wrong. The resolution proposing the Equal Rights Amendment passed the Congress with the requisite two-thirds majority in each chamber in 1972. The resolution contained within it a time limit for ratification. That time limit was 7 years, ending in 1979. As the expiration date approached, and supporters of the Equal Rights Amendment worried that they still did not have ratification resolutions from the required 38 states, they moved a resolution through the Congress that extended the time frame for ratification by 3 years. That resolution passed each house with a simple majority, not a two-thirds majority. Despite being given another 3 years to complete the task of winning ratification in 38 states, the ERA's supporters failed to do so. 1982 came and went without the necessary ratifications to be added to the total, and the ERA was dead. Then, inexplicably, as the years went on, some states that had ratified the resolution thought twice and decided to rescind their earlier ratifications. Totally unnecessary. It was already dead, but whatever. But other states that had never spoken to the issue decided to pass resolutions of ratification anyway, ignoring the fact that the time for ratification had long since passed. Virginia became the 38th state to pass a resolution of ratification in 2020. But remember, several states, 5 in fact, had rescinded their earlier resolutions of ratification, and the resolution extending the time frame for ratification had only passed by a simple majority, not the two-thirds majority required to pass a constitutional amendment on to the states. The president is not the federal government official responsible for determining when an amendment has been ratified by the requisite number of states to add it to the Constitution. That job is reserved for the Archivist of the United States, Dr. Colleen Shogan, who released a statement in mid-December declaring her assessment that based on court decisions and multiple analyses by the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel, the ERA had not met the requirements for ratification. On Joe Biden's last morning in office, with only hours left in his term of office, the White House released preemptive pardons for Dr. Anthony Fauci, former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, other members and staff of the House January 6 Committee, and members of the Capitol Police and D.C. Metropolitan Police who testified before the House January 6 Committee. And later that morning, with less than 20 minutes left in his term of office, the outgoing Biden White House communications team released a statement revealing that Biden had issued preemptive pardons covering the period from January 1, 2014 to January 20, 2025 for virtually his entire family, his brother James, James's wife Sarah, his brother Francis, his sister Valerie Owens, and Valerie's husband John Owens. In what has to go down in history as one of the most ironic declarations ever, the White House statement said that Biden was pardoning them not because they had committed any crime, but because he feared the incoming president would weaponize the Justice Department against them because of their relationship to Biden, Trump's political opponent. Now let's talk about cabinet confirmations, the ongoing struggle. Senate committees will continue to hold confirmation hearings this week. On Wednesday, the Senate Judiciary Committee will hold a business meeting to vote on the nomination of Pam Bondi to serve as Attorney General. The Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee will hold a confirmation hearing on the nomination of Howard Lutnick to serve as Secretary of Commerce. The Finance Committee will hold a confirmation hearing on the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services. The Small Business Committee will hold a confirmation hearing on the nomination of Kelly Loeffler to serve as Administrator of the Small Business Administration. On Thursday, the Judiciary Committee, chaired by Iowa Republican Charles Grassley, will hold its confirmation hearing for FBI Director nominee Kash Patel. The Armed Services Committee will hold its hearing for Secretary of the Army nominee Daniel P. Driscoll. The Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, chaired by Arkansas Republican Tom Cotton, will hold its hearing for Tulsi Gabbard, President Trump's nominee to serve as Director of the Office of National Intelligence. The Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee will hold a confirmation hearing on the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services. The Foreign Relations Committee will hold a business meeting to vote on the nomination of Elise Stefanik to serve as Ambassador to the United Nations. Now, finally, Trump is back. On Monday, January 20, President Trump took the oath of office for the second time, starting a 1,460-day clock ticking. He wasted no time. After taking the oath and giving his second inaugural address, he signed paperwork in an office at the Capitol to get things started. He signed paperwork in the middle of his truncated inaugural parade, staged indoors at the Capital One Arena, where the local basketball and hockey teams play their games. Then he signed more paperwork in the Oval Office before heading out to various inaugural balls. All told, he signed 26 executive orders with more than 200 separate executive actions. His strategy was simple: shock and awe. He put his foot on the gas with the pedal to the metal and just plain overpowered the system, leaving the bureaucracy, the dominant media, and his political opponents all gasping and grasping. Those actions: declare a national emergency at the southern border, declare an invasion at the southern border, declare certain Latin American drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, enhance border security, remove illegal aliens, authorize the U.S. military to plan for a deployment to the southern border, suspend refugee resettlement for an indefinite period, end birthright citizenship, establish a border wall, resume the Remain in Mexico policy, end use of the CBP One app, terminate catch and release, end the federal government's DEI initiatives and climate change-driven activities, terminate the weaponization of government, order federal government employees back to work in their offices, freeze federal hiring, except for military, national security, and border security needs, freeze the issuance of new regulations, pardon those convicted of or charged for offenses related to the January 6, 2021 Capitol event, and order the withdrawal of the United States from both the Paris Climate Accord and the World Health Organization. Further, the executive actions revoke the security clearances of more than 46 former intelligence and national security officials for election interference, direct cabinet secretaries and senior economic advisors to examine trade and tariff policy to address unfair and unbalanced trade, declare a national energy emergency and direct a review of obstacles to domestic energy infrastructure, suspend and review leasing and permitting practices related to wind energy projects, instruct cabinet secretaries to review agency activities that potentially burden domestic energy production, order the government to immediately pause the disbursement of funds from the wrongly named Inflation Reduction Act, revoke Biden-era regulatory actions regarding so-called clean energy initiatives, direct that federal buildings be designed in classical architectural styles, recognize the status of career senior executive service officials as subordinate and accountable to the president, direct the Secretary of State to employ an America First policy at the Department of State, pause for 90 days disbursement of U.S. foreign aid and review U.S. foreign aid programs, remove the U.S. from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, restrict the disbursement of federal funds to so-called sanctuary jurisdictions, loosen restrictions on developing Alaskan energy resources, heighten the vetting of visa seekers from certain areas, establish the Department of Government Efficiency, define women and girls as females, and men and boys as males, defining male and females as biological, binary, and immutable. Remove the promotion of gender identity and gender ideology from federal communications, policies, ID cards, and more. Reform the federal hiring process to make it merit and skill-based, and rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, and rename Denali, the highest mountain in North America, to its former name, Mount McKinley, among others. Each of those executive actions was signed within Trump's first 12 hours back in office. Trump followed up on Tuesday, signing more executive orders designed to end all federal DEI programs. DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And what it is racial discrimination, which, of course, was outlawed by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. President Lyndon Johnson, who famously signed the Civil Rights Act into law, turned around in 1965 and issued an executive order initiating federal government-wide affirmative action programs. Trump's orders don't just reverse executive orders signed by Joe Biden. They actually go all the way back to the Johnson executive order of 1965 and overturn that one, too. To give you just one idea of how pernicious this racial discrimination in federal programs has been, a study last year from Open the Books revealed that in just one cabinet department, the Department of Health and Human Services, there are 294 employees whose principal function is to execute DEI programs, and their salaries total about $40 million a year. And in the HHS budget proposal for the most recent fiscal year, which lays out how and how much the department plans to spend, there are more than 800 references to DEI programs. And that's just in one agency. Now, there's an interesting theme to Trump's executive actions, especially as compared to the executive actions ordered by his predecessor, Joe Biden. Trump's executive actions seek to reclaim the rule of law, even as they launch, or relaunch in some cases, popular initiatives, while Biden's think the never-ending student loan debt payback scam, the eviction moratorium, and the various vaccine mandates on employers and the military. Biden's were done lawlessly and in direct contravention to the will of the people as reflected by the Congress. He kept up the pace throughout the week. On Friday evening, Trump fired more than a dozen agency inspectors general in apparent violation of a law that requires he give the Congress 30 days notice before he fires an IG. That may be tested in the courts. We'll see. Now to the Department of Government Efficiency. The two-headed Department of Government Efficiency is over and done. The experiment didn't quite make it to the president's first cabinet meeting. Elon Musk will be heading the new effort by himself as former co-leader Vivek Ramaswamy returns to his native Ohio to contemplate and plan for a run for governor in 2026. The new structure has DOGE taking over the U.S. Digital Service, which had been a part of the executive office of the president. It will remain there in the White House complex, where Musk will have easy access to the Oval Office and where Russ Vought's OMB operation is close by. Now let's talk about border security and illegal immigration. One of the most important issues in the election, and one on which there was a greater difference between the two candidates than any other, contributing importantly to Trump's victory, was the issue of border security and illegal immigration. As I mentioned above, various aspects of the U.S. government's approach to illegal immigration were featured prominently in Trump's Day One executive actions. Let's take a moment to look at 5 of them. Trump signed an executive order to end birthright citizenship for children born in the United States to many non-citizen parents. Many people believe the 14th Amendment to the Constitution confers citizenship on anyone born in the United States, and point to that amendment to say Trump is wrong. In fact, a federal district judge did that, putting Trump's order on hold, as he called it, unconstitutional. But the language of the 14th Amendment isn't quite as simple as some would have you believe. There's an important qualifying clause in its discussion of citizenship. The amendment reads as follows, quote, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state in which they reside." That makes it clear that the only people who are citizens are people who are born or naturalized, but not everyone who is born or naturalized is granted birthright citizenship, or the authors of the 14th Amendment wouldn't have bothered to include that extra phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, in their language. Why would they have added it, if not to qualify citizenship? Well, what does it mean? It means people who are here legally. Say, for instance, foreign diplomats have a baby here. Is their child a citizen of the United States? No, because the child is the child of accredited diplomats who are here to officially represent their country's interests here. They're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. They have what's called diplomatic immunity. So does their child. If legally accredited foreigners are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, why would illegal aliens be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? Now, remember, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me there's at least a reasonable argument to be made here. So don't be surprised if the courts don't side with the liberals automatically on this issue. Nevertheless, 22 states immediately sued to block the order. Another group of 4 states sued as well, and they won a temporary injunction keeping the order from going into effect for 2 weeks while the court considers the case. Trump's executive actions also included a 3-month suspension of the U.S. refugee program. The order directs the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security to conduct a review and determine whether it is in the interests of the United States to resume admitting refugees. And the 2 secretaries will submit an additional report every 90 days until they determine that it is in the interests of the United States to resume the program. Further, the president's day one actions included an order to shut down the CBP One app. That's a smartphone app that allowed immigrants to apply for appointments at legal points of entry. All such appointments that had already been scheduled were canceled, leaving many immigrants in limbo. The Biden administration had been using the app as a means to control the flow of immigrants across the border. President Trump's orders included an increased military presence at the southern border. He'll use military troops to resume construction of the border wall and to allow for surveillance of the border, including by using drones. The Pentagon is sending about 1,000 Army troops and about 500 Marines. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. Please visit the front page of our website, teapartypatriots.org. That's teapartypatriots.org to sign up to support President Trump's nominees and his agenda. You can find a form right there on the front page and use it to join our team of patriots committed to defending individual liberty, shrinking the size and scope of government, and enacting the Make America Great Again agenda. Thanks. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, be well and be active.